I'm Eduardo and this is the JavaScript Haunted House. We learned how to work with different elements during this adventure, from simple variables to the main HTML object. In this chapter, we'll go further and learn how to communicate with the browser. Previously, we've seen the DOM and how to use JavaScript to interact with it. We've also seen that the DOM is created inside the browser window. If we can communicate with the document, why not with the browser itself? We can, and it's possible by the methods and properties of the BOM, the Browser Object Model. Let's clear this up. We can say that the first thing to be loaded in the browser is the window, and then the document. The window can be considered the root JavaScript object. Through the window, we can access different properties and methods, and through window.document, you can access the document with its own properties and methods. Since the window is the root object, we don't need to type window each time we want to access it. That's why, for example, the alert method is called by itself. In the same way, every time we want to access the DOM, we just type document when we are actually calling window.document. Using the BOM, we can access window properties like name, width and height, and even history, for example. The window object references the window open in the browser, and through it we have access to multiple methods and properties. Alert, confirm, and prompt, methods we've been using in previous chapters, are methods of the window object. As we are invoking a browser behavior, we need to communicate the BOM when we want to call these methods. With JavaScript, we can also close the window, open a new window, or scroll down the page until a defined position. The window object has some properties, such as page X offset and page Y offset, returning the page scroll position in the X and Y axis, respectively. When you're at the top of the page, the window returns 0 to page Y offset. If we scroll down 500 pixels, the page Y offset returns 500. Note that properties don't require parentheses. They are accessed as variables. They can also be accessed without the word window. As an alias, you can also use scroll X and scroll Y to access the same functions. Another very important thing you need to know is that the window object can also access other objects. The document is an object, which is accessed through the window.document. Besides document, the most used objects are window.location, window.screen, and window.history. Now let's take a look at each one. With the object location, we have access to the current address, the domain, and some other information about the page, as well as redirect the user to another page. As an example, we can type location.href to return the entire page address. We can access hostname, which will return just the domain. Protocol, which will return which protocol is being used on the page. And finally, path name, which will return the path after the domain. We can also use JavaScript to set a new URL and load a new page. The assign method will replace the current URL for the one passed as an argument, as in this example. There is yet another way to change the URL, through the href property. We assign a new value to it, as follows. There is no significant difference between them, but the second one is usually faster. In the screen object, we can find information about the user screen. You can retrieve information about the screen dimensions or only about the browser dimensions. For example, if the user screen has a resolution of 1920 by 1080, accessing different properties will return different values. Height and width return the absolute values of the screen, while avail height and avail width will return only the available dimensions for the browser. Accessing the history object, we have access to everything you did last summer. Just kidding, we actually have access to the history of the browser. But for privacy reasons, we cannot see the history. We only have access to two main methods, back and forward. As the name suggests, these methods help us to navigate through the records of history, simulating button clicks in the back and forward buttons in the browser. It's time to finish our inventory with a flourish. We're going to use everything we've seen so far to create a JavaScript code able to interact with the user, use browser functions, and change the DOM. So far, we've been adding static items, and it's time to change that. Let's create a function triggered by a button that displays a prompt, adding what we'll type in this input as a new item. Let's start with the button with the text, add item. This button will trigger the chain of events that will end in a new item added. The second step is to create a function that will make this happen. Out of the inventory object, we declare an addItemPrompt function, because we'll use the prompt method to get the value. Inside the function, we declare an item variable which will receive the return of the prompt. When we get the name, it's just call the function addItem, as we've been doing previously. The last step is to put the function inside the onClick of the button, defining what should call the function. Let's try it. After the click, you see the prompt on the screen. Let's type an item name and click OK. Look, new item included in the inventory. Let's try again. Oops, inventory is full. At least our code is working the way we expected. We're done with our inventory, but there's another thing we can do with the bomb that will make your jaw drop: timing events. The window has the power to run code after a timeout or run the same code several times after a time interval. Amazing, right? By understanding these two functions, the possibilities using JavaScript become almost endless. Without further ado, the functions are setTimeout and setInterval. The setTimeout takes two parameters, the function to be invoked and the time in milliseconds that JavaScript must wait before calling the function. Similarly, the setInterval receives the function to be called and the time interval between the calls. Let's look at each one closely. Window.setTimeout, or only setTimeout, allows us to execute some code after a certain time. To better understand this, let's create a timesup function that shows an alert on the screen. setTimeout will receive this function as argument, without the parentheses, because we are defining a function to be called and not invoking the function right now. Let's also define that we want this function to be called after 2000 milliseconds, or 2 seconds. Let's refresh the page and wait. There you go. After 2 seconds, the function was called. This is the basic operation, and using it, we can define any code to be executed by JavaScript. We can also cancel the execution of a setTimeout, calling the clearTimeout function. For this, we need to assign the execution of the timeout to a variable and pass the variable as an argument to the function. Obviously, we need to call clearTimeout before the time defined in setTimeout is up. In this case, since the clearTimeout is called in the very next line, the timesup function will not be executed. The setInterval is similar to setTimeout, but it executes the function multiple times. Let's code. To understand that the same function is being called multiple times, let's define a variable to be updated and display it on the console. At every execution, the variable count will be increased by 1. With the set interval, we set the execution of the update function every 500 milliseconds, or every half second, as you prefer. Let's open the console and run the code. It works! Just as the set timeout, the set interval can also be stopped, this time using clear interval. It's time to solve the mystery. What awaits us in the last room? A single challenge separates us from the truth. Good luck!